Hello, I'm John Gailer with the National Dropout Prevention Center. And like many of you here in March 2020, I find myself working from my home office. Our world has turned upside down in ways that we would never have imagined even a few weeks ago. We are finding ourselves here in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. Things are different. We don't know how long that this new paradigm will hold up, but one thing we're sure of, things will never be the same afterward. I want to take some time in this brief presentation and try to talk a little bit about some of the stresses and the trauma that our young people and our students experience because of this time. We'll also talk about how that can affect their learning, it can affect their behavior. And then we'll give you some tips that if you're a teacher who's teaching online, maybe you can put those into practice. If you're still working with young people in person, or maybe you're a parent and getting some tips on how to work with your own children at home. Hopefully this will give you some information on how you can come alongside them and help all of us as we navigate some of these difficult times. We know that the coronavirus is everywhere in the news. We hear about it all the time. We hear about the taxing that it is going to have on our hospitals and our healthcare system. We hear about the shortage of ventilators. We hear about a shortage of beds. We hear about death counts, confirmed case counts. We hear the schools have closed, and we've seen that, and that's put a lot of our kids out of sorts, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But our activity as far as the schools closing is concerned is a major issue. We hear about all of our restaurants, even our entertainment and thing has closed due to the coronavirus. We hear about the stock market crashing and financial pressures. We're heading into another recession or even a depression. We're talking about people losing their life savings, losing their jobs. We hear about companies closing down, and all of this could come to be. And even amazing, even our beloved sports that we often turn to for escape have totally canceled, and they're gone for the moment. But all of that puts stress, and it does something interesting. It eliminates some of the things. There are certain things that really contribute to our resilience and contribute to the way that we can handle stress and the way that we can handle trauma. Those are things that contribute to our resilience. They're probably the most important is our relationships. Our relationships with anybody at home, with a significant other. For children, a lot of times that's either a parent, it can be a coach, it can be a mentor, but many times it's a teacher. And those relationships really do help us have a sense of resilience and a sense of stability. Our routines, even just getting up and going to school every day, or getting up and going to work every day, or being involved in afternoon activities or weekend activities or different groups that we belong to, all of those things and those routines give us a sense of stability, and they give us a sense of really a sense of well-being and that things are okay. There's also a sense of control, that we have options and we have abilities and we have things that we can do, and we have an internal locus of control where we can make things happen and we can really control our fate and where we're going. All of those things have been wiped out by the coronavirus. If we look at the student stressors that they're going through, those relationships from peers, those relationships from any staff at the school, if we look at those relationships from a teacher, particularly those relationships with a teacher, or if it's in an activity, those relationships from a coach, or those relationships from some other adult that really pours into the young person's life, those things being cut off and being taken away are a significant stressor. Just taking the structure of school away. For some of our young people, school is the safest place that they go. That structure and that support of that structure is gone. And there's the uncertainty that it would ever return back to normal. There is the validation of achievement that they can get at school or any of these other activities that are gone. And those are things that they need. Those are things that help them to thrive, that help them build resilience. Many of them are facing family difficulties. And that's the norm when they are in school and when life is going going well. But when we fall into a situation like we do now, those student stressors become really increased. The current situation that we find ourselves in, really stressful times. It's nice for some of us to really have increased family time. We're all together, and that's wonderful. But for some of our students, that's a difficult time because family is not a safe place. There's dysfunction. There's anger. There's a lack of structure. There's substance abuse. There's verbal abuse, emotional abuse. There are struggles, and it may not be directed just at that child, but any of the dysfunction in between family members often gives young people a real stressful and almost traumatic chronic stress situation. You know, when we think about this particular situation, and we're talking about the coronavirus, and you're talking about the numbers of people that might contract the illness and might even pass away as a result of the issues. Some of the biggest fears of young people are family members or parents dying and leaving them perhaps alone. That increased family time provides a lot of stress. There's no escape. There's no way for them to go. Sometimes if there's dysfunction in the home, by going out and playing with friends or going over to a friend's house or going over to other family members' houses or even going to school, that provides a way of escape. But there is no way of escape. And social media is always a hound for our young people and for our students. There's always comparison. There's always hearing about what's happening. And social media is loaded with the news about the coronavirus. We're all facing online learning. For students, they're trying to figure out how to navigate that, how to access assignments, how to do assignments, how to sometimes access the resources in order to complete the assignments. For our teachers, we're trying to navigate how in the world do we teach online? That's new for some of us. And that can be a struggle, and that provides stress, and that provides increased stressful response. For some of our students, there's a lack of resources, and we think of the times now and what's happening and coming with this disease. And we've shut everything in our economy down. And those that work, particularly those that work for hourly wages, or work for tips, or work on commission and not being able to go to work, and all of a sudden there is no income. And it's not worrying about when the next paycheck is coming. It's worrying about, we're hurting because we're missing even the next shift or the next time on the schedule. And parents are hearing that, and parents are talking about that. This is also a great time for distractions, for young people to get involved in activities and get really lost in entertainment or other things that really can just cause them to focus inward in ways that sometimes are not healthy. So in those current conditions, you see that there's a real heightened sense of chronic stress and trauma. If trauma, remember, we define trauma as an emotional response to some threat, whether it is something that is real, something I heard about, or something that I even perceive might happen or could happen. That's all we're hearing about with this disease. And we know that when we enter and when we go into that, when we're facing stress and trauma, some of the common manifestations of that, we know them full well. We know we get agitated. We know that we get irritated. We get irritable. We get short. We can get cutting in our language. We get angry. We get impatient. All of that begins to happen. There's also, because of the way the stress and the trauma impacts the brain, there's an inability to focus. There's an inability to lock in on something and stay with it long term and really persist in things like assignments, in things like projects, in staying with something. We have the tendency when we get stressed and we are under the effects of trauma to forget, and the memory recall. And those things that even that we know and we know full well, we may have conversations, we may read something and we just can't recall, because the stress and the trauma is impacting the brain in a way that makes that physically difficult to happen and to take place. We develop a sense of hopelessness and apathy, ready to give up. We think of many times when we try something new, like an online learning platform or any kind of a conversation thing. When we try something new, under the effects of stress and trauma, we're ready to bail out and to forget and to give up. We also experience, under the effects of stress and trauma, a lot of our young people and even us as adults, we experience a lot of physical maladies. Things like digestive disorders, aches and pains, headaches, all of those things. For children, we can revert back to things like bedwetting. There can be an increase in acne. All of those things happen. Then, of course, the last one that you see on the slide is withdrawal. We isolate. And while we're talking about socially isolating, this is the kind of withdrawal that even withdraws from healthy interaction. And they begin to dwell on who they are, and that negative self-esteem begins to creep up. Another effect of stress and trauma. And there are the messages that they can't do anything. It's not worth trying. All of those are very common effects of stress and trauma. And we can see them heightened in our communication. We can see them heightened in the way that we address projects, in the way that we address tasks. And then we think of a household of people who are isolated together, all going through stress, and all demonstrating some of these kind of behaviors. It can be a very difficult and a very traumatic time for a young person. As we move through this material, I really want to make it clear that we typically would say, there's a study that said 68% of adults in the U.S. had experienced some type of trauma during their childhood. And we would extrapolate that and say that there's anywhere about 70% of our young people and our students have experienced chronic stress or trauma in our schools. And they're carrying that stress and trauma when we were in schools and when they were attending classes. And now that they're out, there's just an added dimension of that. But there's also an added demographic to that, because now you can say almost 100% of our children and our students have gone through this type of traumatic experience. And it's not going away. When I think of the effects of this, in our school system, they're debating do they bring the students back in this current school year, or do they wait and bring them back in the fall, continue the entire year online. But just if schools do come back and students do return and we get back to a normal function, the stress and the trauma effects of this pandemic stay with it, and may stay with some of these young people for life when they hear of somebody contracting the flu, when they have a fear of a loved one or a family member that gets seriously ill. All of these feelings can come back, and some of those same manifestations may manifest themselves. So we're talking about an issue with our young people that we really need to work toward building resilience and teaching them how to cope with this. And we want to give you some tips for that. Some things that we want to talk about. First of all, let's just look at distance education. And when we're teaching online, what are some tips and things that we can do when we get to that kind of delivery of education? So we want to give you just a few tips as we move into that. The first is to be creative. Don't settle for just sharing information and communicating information in a lesson or in a video. Be creative. Use humor. Use anything that can turn an activity into something that is fun. Be creative in sharing information. Be creative in ways that you communicate. Be creative in the assignments and in the activities that you ask your students to be involved in. The second is individual communication. Take the initiative and communicate not just through videos and through written assignments and things like that, but make the extra effort to touch base on an individual basis with not only just individuals, but you might also try to arrange some way to communicate with a small friend group that might be in your class, or that you know is communicating back and forth, but just to touch base and communicate individually. And we'll talk a little bit about that in just a few moments. The other is to encourage outdoor activity. This is a great time for students, for young people, for all of us, and I encourage you as well to go ahead and take advantage of some sort of outdoor activity, to get outside, get some fresh air, move around, so that you get out of the containment and the confinement of the four walls around you at all times. So encourage some outdoor activity. If you can do that with assignments, if you can do that with any kind of activity that you might ask the class to engage in. You could ask every student in your class to take a walk from their door to the street and back and tell you 3 things that they observe. It's at least an outdoor activity that they might be engaged in. The 4th tip that I would share with you is to be honest, but be hopeful. If students may ask you, are we going to be okay? You need to acknowledge that this is a serious situation. This is an illness, and it is possible for us to get sick, but the doctors would take care of us, and if we're careful, we can treat this illness. Be hopeful, but be honest. In age-appropriate fashion, go ahead and respond to some difficult questions if you get those. Being honest, don't make promises that you can't keep, but be hopeful. Any message that you send to any of your students or to the group or to the individual, when we type it out, a lot of times we're very quick to just hit the send button. We're in that task-oriented mode. We want to get it done. And I encourage you to stop, go back, and review the message for tone. Is there a way that you can be more hopeful with that message? Is there a way that you might be able to be a little more creative in that message? Students are looking for something new, hopeful, and fun and exciting. And then the other is use mindfulness. Mindfulness activities that you can ask students to do on their own and give them to do are very helpful during this time. They're very good when it comes to help minimizing the effects of stress and trauma. You might ask them to do a mindfulness activity, perhaps at the beginning of an assignment, to reach out and find the texture of something around them and describe it. Anything that is mindfulness that brings them to the here and to the now can be helpful. In those distance times, it's really easy sometimes to just submit the videos and to send it, but this is a time to be creative, encourage individual communication, ask them to go outdoors and to be active, and to really focus on those things as much as we do on the lessons that we're submitting by video or through written request. The National Dropout Prevention Center is working with schools across the country. I believe we're in about 20-something states at this point, implementing what is called the Trauma-Skilled Schools model. And in that model, we encourage schools to foster a climate that really encourages resilience and helps students build the qualities and the resilience that they can use to better manage and to work through some of the difficult things that they are going through. In that, we ask them to foster 5 different resilience factors. We're going to talk about those 5 just briefly, and then I want to give you some tips on how you can do all 5 of those, even in the situation that we're in. And these are things that help our students to build in resilience so that they can be more effective in handling adversity, trauma, and chronic stress, and not only now, but throughout their whole life. Those 5 resilience factors, as you can see on the screen, are connection, belonging, achievement, autonomy, and fulfillment. First, when we talk about connection, we're talking about a one-on-one relationship. This is why the individual communication is so important. Every student needs somebody in their lives, a caring adult, who is touching base, who is their champion, who is the person that comes alongside them, will challenge them, will listen to them, who understands them. In building connection, we would say, first of all, take the initiative for individual connection and communication. When you reach out, either by email, by text, however it is, by video chat, however it is that you reach out and reach out individually, be personal. Be personal and be a person interested in a person, not just an official, not the teacher, and I'm making my official communication or contact, but be personal, be conversational, be comforting, address activity and life circumstances. What is it that they're doing? How is it that they are with their family? Who all is there? How many people there? What is their arrangements in their house? Do they have access to resources? Are they at home with several siblings who are school age and they're all sharing the same computer, and they share that with a parent who is now working from home? What are those kinds of things? But take the initiative for individual connection and communication. Number 2, remember the effects of stress and trauma when it relates to communication. You want to affirm your connection, the fact that you care about them, the fact that you are still there, you are still a support, they can still count on you, and you are still there. Remember, the stress is the fact that this relationship and connection is cut off. So affirming that you're still there is valuable for them. Answers may come slowly as you ask questions. They may have a difficult time responding back. Their memory, remember, they may ask the same question over and over and over. And you've got to remember, one of the effects of stress and trauma is that memory recall and retrieval is not functioning. So you want to be clear, be calm, and be positive. You want to end every conversation with a phrase that is very positive. It's so good to talk to you. It's so good to hear from you. I'm so glad I can get in touch with you. The third thing that I would share is to take advantage of this good opportunity for family connection. You're setting the stage for when they come back. And for that next teacher maybe who wants to try to engage that family and those parents, this is a good time. Parents are typically at home. And when they're at home, we can talk to them. We typically think sometimes of parent engagement as getting that parent into the school. But this is an opportunity for us to talk with them while they're at their home. Be a source of information. Especially you can talk to them. It's a good thing to try to educate them about the effects of stress and trauma. Talking about, when we're under stress, we act this way. We get irritable. We get angry. We get forgetful. We can't focus. Share with them that may be what they're experiencing with their children. That may be what they're experiencing as parents. And it's a good thing to know that some of that is just the effects of the stress that we're all under. And then compliment the strengths of the students. Speak positively to that one. The next resilience factor that we talk about is belonging, and that is having a sense of, in connection you've got the one-to-one. In belonging you have a sense where I belong to that group, and I fit, and I'm safe there, and I belong there, and if I'm not there, they miss me. It's that sense of belonging and an emotionally safe space. When it comes to belonging, that is all about predictability. The things that the places where we feel safe are places where we know what is going to happen, and we can expect to be greeted a certain way, we can expect to be treated a certain way, we expect certain things to happen. So with that in mind, we want to encourage you to encourage schedule and routine. And if you can encourage your students to set a schedule and a routine. Establish your own schedule and times when you're going to be available for communication, and when you're going to communicate, then be dependable and be reliable to keep that. But that predictability and that readiness is something that can help build resilience in those young people. It's too easy when we're not in school and we're doing online school to sleep in late, to keep putting off lessons and different things. So encourage a schedule and routine for those young people. And if you have a chance looking back at connection and you have a chance to connect with parents, encourage that on the part of the parents. The second thing is to remind students of rituals observed in the classroom and to create different rituals, new rituals. Rituals are things that we do over and over, and they're things that we expect. When I was in school, we'd always said the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we prayed, and that was a ritual. It was something that I could count on, and regardless of what I believed or regardless of where I was, I always knew those two things said I was okay and I was in school. Remind students of those things that your class does. If there are particular phrases that you say at different times of the day or of the week. Create rituals, create special things that they can look forward to that you do over and over. Perhaps, and you see one on the screen there, just a Throwback Thursdays. How did they buy music in the 1950s? Let them research that. Throw out the question and give them something to do. The other thing is to use mottos and logos in communications, taglines. Come up with a tagline for this time while we're distant. Away but not forgotten, together by distance, whatever you want to come up with as a tagline or a motto. Use that in your communication, in your taglines for emails. Say it when you get off the phone. Come up with something that helps them feel like there is a sense of belonging. The third of our resilience factors is that of achievement. And we think of students who are impacted by chronic stress and trauma. Often there is the feeling that they cannot accomplish things. Their self-esteem is low, and they feel like it doesn't matter if they try. It's not going to work anyway. And sometimes they'll sabotage the effort just to show that, see, I told you I couldn't do it. See, I told you I could. And they have a sense that they can't do anything. But all of our students have some strengths, and achievement is about operating from a strengths-based perspective to find out what that student is good at, whether it's something in the classroom, whether it's something academically, whether it's something socially, whether it's something athletically. Find that strength and complement and work and see that student through that lens of strength. And in that way, we work to convince them that they are able to do things, to try to persuade them. The first is to praise and affirm the abilities of students, especially those that are not academic. Be very specific. When you praise, be very specific in your praise and in your compliments. It's not, you're such a good student. It's, you're always prepared. It is, I appreciate the way you interact with your classmates. You're so kind. Praise and give praise in specific ways. Praise individuals, but then also praise the entire class in your videos, in your materials, and things like that. I'm so glad this class is working together. It's so good to have all of them there. Don't make them all about the content, but make it about relationship and sharing with them that you know they can do things. The second thing in achievement, the tip that we would give, is to inquire about lessons that are being learned during this time, especially the non-academic lessons. What are you learning about getting along with people? What are you learning about what you miss most? What are you learning that you really enjoy doing? So we want you to inquire about lessons that are being learned during this time, and then especially the non-academic lessons. And then the third is to be positive about this situation and the student's response. Be positive about the fact that you are able to communicate, that you are able to work together, even though it's distance in that kind of an arrangement. And constantly be positive about the student's response. Constantly telling them it was good to hear from them. They're doing a good job. You can tell that they're working hard. Gives a sense of achievement. The fourth of our 5 resilience factors is that of autonomy. And autonomy is about having control. It's a difference between having an internal locus of control and an external locus of control. Students who are affected by stress and trauma often operate from an external locus of control. They feel like they're victims. They're just bad stuff just happens to them. They're a victim of fate. And they can't do anything to chart their course. So autonomy is about having choices and about having options. It's about having the opportunity to really to be in control of your life. Some of the things that we say is the first tip we would share is to provide students the flexibility in student response, to allow students to choose maybe a response or maybe to an investigative project to be done online where you might provide 5 questions and they get to choose one and answer it. Or how are they going to demonstrate their learning back to you? Giving them flexibility, very difficult in an online situation, but it can be done. The other thing is that, and the second 2 tips really focus on an area of social emotional learning and social emotional intelligence. And one is to really acknowledge the validity of emotions and frustrations. If in conversation you hear that there's a frustration, the student's frustrated with his family, the student is frustrated with this situation, the student doesn't want to be, that is an emotion that is real. And one of the best ways for you to connect and convince that student that they really are in control, that emotion is okay. It's okay to be frustrated. It's okay to be angry. Now, what are we going to do about it? And how are we going to change the situation? And when you acknowledge the validity of those emotions and frustrations, you tell that student that they're okay in that realm and they can feel those emotions. But then focus on what's under your control and what's under the student's control. So what can the student do about that? The other thing the third tip that we would share with you, you see on the slide, is to teach social emotional intelligence. Lessons like what to do before you get angry, or when you get angry, or what are the things that cause you to respond inappropriately. What can you do instead of responding inappropriately? Teaching some social emotional intelligence. One of the aspects that we teach when it comes to autonomy is one of the biggest things is students need to have autonomy and choices in the things that they learn and the things that they do, but they also need to have autonomy, and that is control, emotional and behavioral autonomy. They need to learn to manage. They need to learn to manage their emotions and their behavior. And this is a good time to give them lessons and to talk to them. Just you can send those little lessons out or include little questions in videos and ask students to respond. Different things. Autonomy, the resilience factor. Our fifth resilience factor is that of fulfillment. And fulfillment is giving a sense of empathy and seeing the needs of others and responding to meet the needs of others. And some things that you might be able to do there to give you some tips on that, to discuss good neighbor opportunities with students or sharing inspirational stories or opportunities. During this time in the news, I've heard several stories about young people who are helping out older individuals in different ways. Sharing some of those things that we may hear about. And then converse with students about ways that they might be able to help somebody else, either at home or digitally. How can they help their parents? How can they help their brother or sister? How can they help their other student? Even though they can't get with them, can they work with them to help them in some way? The second is to always express gratitude to students for being an encouragement to you. Be positive and grateful for every communication. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I so appreciate you. Thank you for what you're doing to me, the encouragement, and it makes me feel good. Be positive and grateful, even for minor communication. And the third one is to send notes of encouragement to parents and to families. So we encourage you to build on those 5 resilience factors. It will make a difference in how our students and our young people really can handle adversity and difficulty. We encourage you to take advantage of the tips that we talked about when it comes to distance education. And in this time together, we have talked about some of the stresses that young people face. The fact that this pandemic and the situation and the economic situations that it has created really can put a student under the effects of stress and trauma and could have long impacting results in their lives. So we've talked about how to interact with them, the importance of connection and communication. Talked about the importance of resilience. I want to give you just some final words before we close. And those are, first of all, you need to practice some very good self-care. This is a time where we all need boundaries. We need balance. We need to find some of those mindfulness activities, listening to music, texture, an outdoor walk, writing a journal, something that is going to, that we know that we use to help alleviate some of our stress, and we need to make time to practice that. That's difficult when our entire families sometimes are put together and not allowed to really go places, but we need to find time for ourselves. We need to find time to feel what we are seeing our students go through, and to express that and to talk to others. It might be helpful to talk to others who are colleagues or peers that teach on your hall or in your school, or somebody that where you can discuss some of those situations that you're hearing about. The other thing I can't stress, the final word, is to communicate with individuals. Communicate on an individual level with your students, and we've talked about that. Encourage activity and routine both in your students, in yourself, and in your family. And then the final tip that I would share is to take this time to really invest in yourself and develop yourself in one way or another, professionally or personally, reading good books. You can go to our website professionally. Our website is loaded with resources that are there free of charge. Some of them have a minimal charge to them. Some of them have some higher cost if it's a little more intensive training. But there are a lot of resources even at no cost. Or find some other materials online, but spend some time developing new skills and deepening your skills for yourself. We find ourselves in difficult times, and I trust that you can make the best of it in trying to come alongside your students. They are experiencing stress and trauma in this pandemic in ways we've never known before. It's not going to go away, and that stress and trauma will be there when they come back to our classrooms. So if we can get used to dealing with it now and helping them now, it'll be easier for us to do that in the future. I trust this material and this presentation is helpful. Trust you'll stay well and be careful. Thank you.